When most people hear the word Bigfoot, they picture the exact same thing: a large, bipedal ape hiding out somewhere in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. Indigenous traditions across the continent describe a supernatural and spiritual being, a fixture of cultural heritage that predates the modern concept of a hidden animal. This presence is mirrored in the linguistic diversity of the land. The Coast Salish know it as Sasquatch, the Algonquians speak of the Wendigo, and the Hoopa call it Oma. These histories are grounded in physical, archaeological evidence. On the Tule River Indian Reservation, the records are over 1,000 years old. At a site called Painted Rock, ancient petroglyphs depict a massive, hairy figure known as Mayak Datat, the hairy man, appearing alongside his family. The accounts from these diverse nations point toward a recurring duality in the wilderness. Some tribes describe benevolent protectors, while others warn of terrifying monsters. In many traditions, these massive creatures are viewed as awe-inspiring guardians. They are the enforcers of the natural world, demanding a specific moral conduct from those who enter the forest. The Yukut creation myth places Mayak Datat at a great animal council. He sat with eagle, coyote, and bear to decide how the newly created humans would survive on Earth. Mayak Datat was the one who argued that humans should walk upright on 2 legs, a gift he successfully secured for humanity during the council. For tribes like the Stasales and Yurok, these beings serve as moral regulators. Their versions of the creature, Sasquatch and Oma, are reported to punish those who overexploit natural resources. These guardian figures represent the protective aspects of the wilderness, requiring a level of respect that maintains the ecological balance of the land. Other traditions focus on the terrifying dark factions of the forest, describing malevolent spirits and dangerous hidden tribes. The Lummi speak of the Tsemequis, nocturnal giants who use a hypnotic, low-frequency whistling to lure travelers off the path and into the deep woods. The Apache recount stories of the Mogollon monster, a creature endowed with the ability to shapeshift and summon devastating weather against those who intrude on its territory. Perhaps the most unsettling variant is the Kwakiutl Bukwas. These are stylized skeletal monsters, not living animals, but the undead ghosts of people who have drowned. The Bukwas lurks in the shadows, offering the food of the dead to lost travelers. A single bite traps a human in the spirit realm forever. These malevolent figures embody the lethal and deceptive dangers of the untamed wild, where the environment itself can become a hostile predator. These supernatural forces frequently collided with human tribes. These were not just chance encounters, they were epic struggles where humans often had to fight for their survival. In Chehalis oral history, a clever warrior named Tsiatko used his intellect and magic to outwit a race of cannibalistic giants, the Sitko, eventually defeating them to protect his people. In some regions, the boundary between human and monster was further blurred by stories of abduction and hybridization. Hoopa legend tells of a woman taken by an Oma who gave birth to a son named Oshkosh. He was a half-human, half-Bigfoot hybrid who grew up to lead his people as a mighty warrior. These stories of warfare and shared bloodlines highlight human resilience and a literal connection to the fierce spirit of the North American wilderness. This deep spiritual reverence stands in stark contrast to the modern era, which is often preoccupied with footprints and plaster casts, effectively paving over ancient wilderness in search of a biological specimen. For many indigenous cultures, the significance of the Sasquatch is found in its role as a spiritual and moral regulator, rather than a hidden animal waiting to be verified by science. These legends served as sophisticated mechanisms to preserve tribal identity and enforce ecological balance in an unforgiving landscape. These oral histories suggest we should acknowledge the ancient, supernatural forces of nature that have occupied this land for thousands of years. The Sasquatch remains the ultimate embodiment of humanity's awe, terror, and enduring respect for the mysteries of the unknown natural world. For most of the modern era, Sasquatch has lived strictly in the realm of punchlines. Mention the name, and the immediate image is a blurry tabloid cover, a campfire ghost story, or a guy in a cheap gorilla suit stomping through the woods. Mainstream biology has a very rigid standard for recognizing a new species, and it revolves around a concept called a holotype. A holotype is a physical body, a skeleton, or a clear fossil that serves as the definitive reference point for the animal. Without a body on a slab, the scientific consensus is that the animal does not exist. But what happens when trace evidence begins to pile up? When researchers pull hundreds of massive footprint casts from the mud, measure vast stride lengths, and collect hair samples that don't match known wildlife, a rigorous scientist is faced with a serious dilemma. This photograph shows Dr. Grover Krantz, a physical anthropologist at Washington State University. Krantz, alongside Dr. Jeff Meldrum, a tenured anthropologist with expertise in primate locomotion, decided to break rank. They looked directly at the taboo evidence that their peers were actively ignoring. Taking up this research cost Krantz grant money, delayed his tenure, and invited intense public ridicule. Yet both men persisted, because the anatomical detail locked inside those plaster casts was simply too complex to dismiss as a widespread prank. This is a plaster cast reconstruction of the upper and lower jaws of Gigantopithecus blacki. Krantz hypothesized that Sasquatch was actually a surviving descendant of this known, extinct giant ape. This map shows the Beringia land bridge. Krantz proposed a geographical mechanism for the animal's arrival in North America, theorizing that the massive primate migrated out of Asia alongside other animals during the Pleistocene, when sea levels were significantly lower. Krantz applied strict biomechanical analysis to the famous 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film. He identified what physical anthropologists call a compliant gait, a walking style where the creature moves with permanently bent knees. A normal human walking with permanently bent knees burns enormous energy quickly, but for a 600-pound biped, that exact gait is mechanically necessary to absorb the massive shock of each step without destroying its joints. This photograph shows the Cripplefoot footprint cast recovered in Bossburg, Washington. Krantz examined the cast and found that the plaster perfectly recorded underlying bone deformities, clubfoot characteristics that require a deep understanding of primate anatomy to fake. By forcing the focus onto joint stress, energy consumption, and bone pathology, Krantz forced the field to evaluate the evidence purely on its biomechanical viability. This is the exterior of the Holt Arena at Idaho State University, where Dr. Jeff Meldrum stepped into the void left by Krantz. Meldrum brought a modern, forensic approach to the primatology of the footprints. This animated wireframe illustrates the mid-foot break. While humans have a rigid arch, great apes possess a flexible mid-tarsal joint. When an ape's foot steps into mud, this joint drops downward, pushing soil upward to create a distinct central pressure ridge. If a prankster straps a carved wooden block to their shoe and stomps through the woods, they leave a static, flat impression. They cannot organically replicate a dynamic ridge of soil pushed up mid-step by flexing skeletal joints. Meldrum expanded his analysis to the Skookum body cast, a 400-pound plaster impression recovered from Washington State. It captured massive limb proportions, a heel, an Achilles tendon, and deep impressions of hair left in the mud by a large reclining animal. Moving to the microscopic level, investigators discovered dermal ridges on the soles of some footprint casts. These are the fine friction skin patterns that create fingerprints, seamlessly flowing across the toes and heel of the plaster. Skeptics immediately challenged this, arguing these lines are actually desiccation artifacts, tiny wrinkles that form naturally as wet plaster shrinks and dries in specific types of soil, completely independent of any biological skin. That researchers and skeptics now fiercely debate the fluid dynamics of drying plaster and microscopic friction ridges shows how far this investigation has come. It evolved from folklore into a testable forensic science. Even with a massive database of footprint casts, audio recordings, and debates over microscopic forensics, the primary roadblock remains intact. Without a holotype body, mainstream biology cannot classify a new species. Krantz understood this rule perfectly. He controversially maintained that a specimen had to be shot and killed, arguing it was the only possible way to force the scientific establishment to recognize and ultimately protect the species. Meldrum, operating in a more modern scientific landscape, focuses on non-invasive analysis. His work targets the collection of environmental DNA from hair, saliva, and scat samples left behind in the wild. This is the Smithsonian Institution National Museum of Natural History. Today, Kranz's bones are permanently housed here, securing his legacy as an anthropologist who operated at the highest levels of the field. The trace evidence Kranz and Meldrum spent their careers analyzing is highly complex. The physics required for a compliant gait and the distinct mid-tarsal pressure ridges present a volume of data that resists simple explanations of a hoax. The legacy of these two scientists lies in their methodology. When confronted with unknown, bizarre evidence, they refused to let academic pressure override the scientific method, choosing to examine the physical facts exactly as they found them.